first let's go to John here, and we came across an article by a researcher about a new botnet that isn't just for Windows anymore.
Right. And so, you know, I guess the caveat to all this is I think we've talked in the past that malware doesn't infect only Windows machines. We've talked about, you know, embedded routers getting infected with things. This is somewhat similar in a way. This is the guys from Virus Bulletin who we talked about. Actually, Matt covered that they started publicly releasing a lot of their articles that used to be a subscription service. They came out with another article recently talking about the Mayhem botnet. And it's a botnet that's basically composed of Linux and Unix servers. And the way it works is it scans for vulnerable machines. This is not new either. We've seen this a lot, particularly with some other actors back in the 2012, 2013 timeframe. They look for various vulnerabilities in web servers. Well, what these guys are doing, or this particular botnet is doing, is they're looking for web servers that have a remote file inclusion vulnerability. And what that means is in the URL, you can specify a file name. And if when the server reads that URL, he will go in remotely include that file in the output of the page. So there's various software that has these vulnerabilities through remote file inclusion. Some of them are older versions of WordPress and other things like that, other content management systems. And I actually have an example on the screenshot here. And what they're actually doing is they're going to fetch the remote file inclusion that they try is the google.com humans.txt file, which if you're not familiar with that, it's kind of Google's play on the robots.txt file, which most websites will set up a robots.txt file, and it tells automated web crawlers what to pay attention to or not pay attention to if they don't want you to index certain portions of your website. The humans.txt is just Google's text file. It's basically advertising, hey, congratulations, you found this. Maybe you want to, submit for a job at Google, things like that. It's basically a little self-advertising campaign. In any event, so should that succeed, what this script does is it tries to do the remote file inclusion. If it actually receives the text that's in that file, it does a little string comparison on it. Then it knows, okay, this machine's vulnerable, and it'll go do a follow-up where it actually imports a PHP script. And then when that gets output, now the machine, the web server, executes whatever's in that PHP script, which is going to pull some additional malware files, Unix, Linux-based malware, down to the machine, execute that malware. It's going to probably run under the effective user ID of the web server process, because that's who actually downloaded it and stored it on the machine, hides it in a hidden directory, and then starts doing other, basically now that machine's in the botnet, goes to command and control, receives instructions to go look for more machines and spread and things like that. So this particular malware family, they're calling it Mayhem. And, probably not the only of this variety out there, but it's a pretty good article that they put together. So I'd recommend if you're not familiar with this type of tactic and you have web servers that you operate or manage, it's a really interesting article to go read through, because it shows you kind of the whole process from beginning to end, what kind of malware gets dropped, how they're how they're managing and operating that botnet with the various pieces.
Yeah, there's a really good description of how the malware works.
Yes.
And not a very good description about, did they say much about how this botnet is being used?
For other purposes beyond that, I don't recall that it was in there. If there's some other purpose behind it yet.
And the other portion of it is it wasn't very clear about the command and control or how to actually detect if you might be infected with this sort of thing, unless you have access to the server itself. So from a network monitoring point of view, it wasn't particularly helpful. But yes, I agree with you. A very good detailed article about the malware itself. And but this is obviously the kind of thing we need to be looking out for. You mentioned the privileges. It would not necessarily have the opportunity to perform things on the server as root on the server, but it would be operating with whatever privileges the web server has.
Right, because that's the process that downloaded, stored the files, and executed the commands, right?
Yeah, but if they were very clever, they might be able to do something to do a privilege escalation, another exploit, to subsequently escalate the privileges, gain control of the entire server, and do some other things.
Right,
as well.
And from the article, it did mention that several different modules get downloaded, lots of them, maybe upward in the terms of 20s to even more. So there might be certain things that they just automatically download. Let me try to see if I can do some privilege escalation here really easily. And if not, then they just have it do, act as a bot. But if they can escalate, then they could do some things as root, and then maybe use that as a higher tier part of the botnet, someday, in the future and whatnot.
So at the very least, they would be able to get access to the data that's on the web server, and they would be able to perform denial of service attacks like we've seen before. Somewhat constrained in the type of attack they could perform. They wouldn't be able to do address spoofing very easily, but they certainly could use it to initiate connections to other systems. So those would be the kinds of indications you could look for, network indicators, in fact, you'd want to do anyway. If you're expecting a lot of influx of requests and responses out from your server and that role reverses, you might suspect there's something going on. So those types of behavioral profiles would be ones to be good to watch for.
And if you have control of the web server process itself, you can also do things like add content to the site. So if you're getting a bunch of requests for URIs that aren't yours, or defacement,
or exploit kits, turn it into another,
drive-by downloads,
drive-by downloads, right? Things like that.
Yeah, good points.